Hi everybody and welcome to today's video on Act 4 Scene 2, and this is the second video on this particular scene, so let's get stuck right into it. In terms of the plot so far, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but this would be a good opportunity to pause the video and go back through and try and remind yourself what each of the events are that match the pictures on the screen. So have a little bit of knowledge retrieval practice before we progress with this video. Okay, so in terms of the big question, we're going to look at the same question as we did in the previous video. How does Shakespeare present the patriarchal society? And we see this particularly through the presentation of Emilia and Desdemona and how their characters are transforming as we go through this particular scene. So Othello has verbally abused Desdemona in private, and then he leaves and Emilia re-enters, and Emilia says, you know, is there something wrong between you and my lord? And Desdemona says, well, who is thy lord? And Emilia is obviously referring to Othello here. This is what Desdemona and Emilia call Othello, my lord or thy lord. Whereas Desdemona now seems to be distancing herself from Othello and saying that actually she doesn't own Othello anymore. Earlier on in the play, and I've talked about this quotation lots and lots, Cassio says that Desdemona is our captain's captain, as in she has some kind of ownership, or at the very least equality, with Othello. And here she seems to be saying actually she doesn't have that anymore. There is no way in which Othello is hers. And if you look at what Emilia says, she says, he that is yours, sweet lady, and Desdemona says, I have none. So she's relinquishing any sense of ownership over her husband. And then Desdemona says, do not talk to me, Emilia. I cannot weep, nor answers have I none, but what should go by water. So she's saying she's so deeply upset by the change in her marriage. And then she says, tonight lay on my bed my wedding sheets. Now, these wedding sheets are symbolic, of course, of the marriage between Desdemona and Othello, and of their sexual union as well. And so perhaps Desdemona is hoping that by putting those particular sheets on the bed, that they'll be able to recapture something of that initial passion that they had for each other. We also know that the wedding sheets are linked in with the handkerchief, and that in some way the handkerchief stands in for the wedding sheets. Othello sees the handkerchief as a symbol of Desdemona's infidelity with Cassio, and he thinks that that has been done in his bed on those particular sheets. So there's a connection between those two symbols there. And then Desdemona says, call thy husband, call Iago to come here. So Iago enters and he wants to know what's going on, and Emilia gets increasingly furious, righteously furious, as she discusses what's been happening. And she says the more, so Othello's abused by some most villainous knave, some base notorious knave, some scurvy fellow. And as I said in the previous video, Emilia has got this right. She knows that Othello is being manipulated by somebody, she just doesn't know who. And she describes this manipulator as being base. Now this word we have talked about a lot, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here, but this has got all of the connotations of immorality, deceit, Machiavellianism linked up with it. And she's saying that this is a terrible person who's doing this manipulating. Now, aside from that, the connotations of those words, this tells us a lot about Emilia's character. Emilia is much more worldly wise than Desdemona. She has greater experience of society and of the world, whereas Desdemona has spent most of her life sequestered in a house protected by her father. Whereas Emilia has had a difficult marriage with Iago, she's clearly travelled around and she knows a lot about the world. So she's also a good judge of human character as well. She knows that Othello is jealous, which is something that Desdemona is blind to. And Iago says to Emilia, speak within doors. So basically, if you want to talk about this, let's talk about this when Desdemona isn't there. You know, basically, shut up. And Emilia says, oh, fie upon them. So she refuses to be quiet. And this is really interesting because the first time we saw Emilia, Desdemona says, alas, she has no speech. She doesn't really speak much in public. Whereas as we progress through the play, as Desdemona's character becomes quieter and less forthright, Emilia becomes increasingly outspoken. And so here she says, she turns on Iago and she says that this manipulator who is ruining Othello's life is the same kind of person that made you suspect me with the Moor. So it's the same source, Emilia says, that Iago's jealousy has come from. So again, Emilia is right on the money here. She understands that whoever this person is that's trying to ruin Othello's life is also the person that made Iago jealous of her. Now, what Emilia doesn't do, she doesn't make that final link at this point to realise that this person is Iago. It's the person that she's speaking to. It's interesting here, though, that we have confirmation of Iago's jealousy about Emilia and Othello. Iago refers to it briefly earlier on in the play, and he says that he's not sure of the truth of the accusation, but he thinks that Othello has done my office. He thinks that Othello has slept with Emilia. And we might dismiss that, thinking, well, Iago's just pretending that he's justifying his actions towards Othello. And we might say that actually Iago is acting out of this motiveless malignity that Coleridge describes, that Iago doesn't have any real motivation for what he does. But Emilia's line here reminds us of Iago's personal jealousy as well. And so it gives a little bit more evidence that Iago isn't motivelessly malignant, that actually his motivation is partly because of jealousy of Othello and his distrust of Emilia's relationship with Othello. So then Emilia and Desdemona leave and Rodrigo enters. Now, we haven't seen Rodrigo for a little while. Rodrigo has come from Venice with Iago, and he's being used as Iago's dupe in lots of different ways. So first of all, Iago is using Rodrigo's money. And we find out that Iago has got Rodrigo to buy various precious objects, so jewellery, to give to Desdemona. And Iago says, yeah, give me the jewellery and I'll give it to Desdemona. And Rodrigo is surprised that Desdemona hasn't responded to this. Of course, Iago is just pocketing all of the money and the jewellery himself. So he's exploiting Rodrigo financially, but he's also now going to position Rodrigo to try and destroy Cassio. So Iago says that they need to remove Cassio, and Rodrigo says, how do you mean removing of Cassio? And Iago says, why, by making him incapable of Othello's place, knocking out his brains. So Iago says that they're not going to let Cassio become governor of Cyprus when Othello has to return back to Venice or move on to Mauritania. So they're going to get rid of Cassio at this point. And Rodrigo says, and that you would have me do. Now, this scene is often played in quite a comic way, because Rodrigo is often presented as being not very physically strong. He's not a soldier. He's a socialite. He's someone who likes kind of socialising, going to parties and things. He's not the kind of person to commission to do a murder. So this is often quite a funny moment. Rodrigo is so surprised that Iago is asking him to kill Cassio. And Iago continues, if you dare do yourself a profit and a right. So he's going to manipulate Rodrigo in order to get him to attack Cassio so that the plan can be fulfilled. Now, thinking about this idea of the patriarchy then, I haven't put this up by mistake. This is the same task as I put at the end of the previous video, and I want you to add a little bit more to your notes now, given what we have just read about the remainder of Act 4, Scene 2, because there's some information there about Emilia particularly that might help you to disagree with the statement in a little bit more detail. So thanks for listening, and we will look at Act 4, Scene 3 in the next video.